Welcome to episode 63 of the High Volume Hiring Podcast. I am one of your co-hosts, Stephen Rothberg, and as you're going to notice, there's two of us here today, not usually the threesome. That's kind of inappropriate, I think. My awesome co-host, Jeanette Leeds, is on an airplane on her way, unfortunately, to Las Vegas, and that flight got delayed. Probably through no fault of hers, but we'll have to find out in a couple of weeks when I harass her about that. I am joined today, though, by my friend and fellow whale watcher, Kate Bischoff. This is the Minneapolis episode, I think is what we're going to call it.
Yeah.
Kate, for the viewers who don't know much about you, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background, about your company, the kind of work that you do.
Okay. My name is Kate. I suffer from law degree. I say that because, we as attorneys often get, ridiculed or teased, or we're super scary and intimidating. So I try not to be any of those things. I'm also a recovering HR professional. I got my HR street cred working for the U.S. Department of State at the Consulate General in Jerusalem and then the U.S. Embassy in Zambia before returning home to Minnesota when my kids needed to be in a different educational setting. I've had my own business for the last 7.5 years doing trainings, investigations, and policy and, oh no, what do I do with this guy, Kate, kind of questions that happen a lot. So
Wow.
That's me.
I did not know anything about that Department of State experience. How that's amazing. And anybody who ever has an opportunity to work or study or even just travel overseas, just awesome. So wanted to talk with you today about the U.S. Federal Trade Commission. I think roughly a month ago, maybe a month and a half ago, something like that. And I like to call myself a fully recovering. That's why I laughed at your recover word, lawyer. But it kind of stuck out to me when I was in law school, clerked for a year afterward. I was involved sort of at a lower level by a few non-compete kinds of cases. I remember one very distinctly, and it was like a senior salesperson going from one big auto company to another. Real inside information, budgets, plans, sales strategies, all of that kind of stuff. I remember at the time thinking, this guy's not going to be able to make a living anywhere, because for 30 years, that's all he had done. And now he couldn't do it for anyone else. But in the high volume world, that's a whole different level. So let's hold the high volume piece for a minute. Talk with us about what the FTC is, how they got involved in this, maybe a minute or so for background. I think would be helpful to people who aren't all that familiar with this.
Sure. So the Federal Trade Commission is an agency that dabbles in employment law. It hasn't done a whole lot historically, but if you think of things like the Fair Credit Reporting Act, you think about antitrust things, those do truly belong to the FTC. And so some social media post stuff will also belong to the FTC. So they've been dancing around employment law for some time. The current chairwoman of the FTC, Lina Khan, has been kind of hawkish on antitrust things. And the non-compete world really is a big antitrust. I can't sell my knowledge, skills, and abilities out in the wild if I'm hampered by a contract that says I can't go to any of these competitors. So the things that I know, I can't go do because I've got this contract that doesn't allow me to do that. And the FTC has gotten involved in non-compete things in the past. I am originally from St. Cloud, Minnesota, which has just one major healthcare industry. And so when a doctor wants to leave CentraCare, they have a non-compete. They can't go anywhere else. And the FTC has come down hard on those non-competes where it really has this anti-competitive, monopolistic kind of thing happening. So it doesn't necessarily surprise me because Chairwoman Khan has been upfront about not wanting these non-competes. And we're starting to see a sea change. since the Jimmy Johns, which I'm sure we'll talk about a little bit, the Jimmy Johns revolution, we've seen Washington State, Massachusetts, District of Columbia, and even the great state of Minnesota take a lot of action on non-competes as well. In fact, in Minnesota, they're now void. You can't have them in the great state. Joining the liberal bastion states of Oklahoma and North Dakota, also prohibiting non-competes. So
this really crosses the political spectrum. Then it's one of those small issues or small examples of issues that people on both sides of the aisle seem to either like be really against or really in favor of. Interest. So thank you for mentioning Jimmy John's. So one of my favorite sandwiches.
I believe Herbert's and Gerbert's is better, but okay.
Well, okay, we'll that's another podcast. Like sandwiches around the world. Fun fact: I once did a sandwich tour of New York City. But anyway, that was really fun. It was an opportunity for the guy to basically lead us around neighborhoods with the occasional break for little nibbles. But so Jimmy John's for viewers who have never been to one, which is, I think if you've lived in the U.S., you pretty much know what Jimmy John's is. Maybe you haven't gone in one, but it's a Subway. It's some areas of the country would call it like a hoagie or whatever. But it's a sandwich at the end of the day. And when you walk into any of the stores, and there are hundreds of them, you basically will have like a supervisor or shift manager and maybe 3, 4, 5 employees. And they are definitely hiring at scale, right? Yes. Each individual store, not so much, but collectively, they must be hiring at least hundreds, maybe thousands a month. Yes. My understanding is that this was a really great example of an employer that the men and women who are slapping turkey onto a bun and maybe putting mayonnaise onto it and wrapping it and saying, here you go, all freaky fast, they were covered by non-competes. They could not go across the street or even 4 miles away and work for a Subway or McDonald's or whatever. Is that the scenario that the FTC was trying to get after? Is that it's like the hourly employees that, for people who are watching this podcast, we probably employ a lot of these sorts of folks.
Yes, certainly that was the impetus of this new potential rule. And I say potential rule because it goes into effect at some period of time. I think it's 120, 180 days after the rule was announced. But there's already litigation in place to stop the rule from going into place in the first place. But yes, that hourly worker who, for lack of a better term, doesn't have a whole lot of industry specific knowledge. I mean, like, we literally watch the sandwich get made. Like, there's no secret to what is in that sandwich, right? But that was the secret that they were trying to protect by having non-competes, was to say, you can't go work for Subway to recreate the sandwich, or go to another competitor, or open your own shop and steal that kind of thing. So the non-compete was designed to do that.
And talk about the difference between a non-compete and a non-disclosure. Are they the same? Do employers use them the same? If you were advising an employer, would you be like, oh, just do a non-disclosure so that people don't learn that you can put turkey on a sandwich? I mean, what's the difference between the two of them?
Sure. So there are 3 big kind of components to an employment agreement that's signed at the start of employment. Okay. There can be the non-compete, which means you can't go work for a competitor that's in our same industry, within some geographic scope, within some reasonable scope of time as well. Then there is the non-disclosure agreement, the NDA, which means that I'm not going to share any confidential information, any trade secret information, anything that gets built by me belongs to the company, etc. And then the last one is no solicitation. You can't solicit my customers. You can't solicit my employees to go work for somebody else. So those are 3 big components. It is hard to prove a violation of a non-disclosure agreement, because you have to have some proof that this individual is sharing confidential information with a competitor or something like that. And it's it can be a little easier to do non-solicitation, because if it's for customers, we can ask the customer, hey, did you get contacted by this person? And employees go away. That's a little bit easier. But the non-disclosure, which is perhaps the most important piece, was most easily protected through the non-compete. Because I can just follow someone's LinkedIn to see if they went to work for a competitor. I can, that's pretty easy. If they went to work for a competitor, they violated the non-compete, we're done. Poof, easy. The non-disclosure means that I've got to see them share my information, or I got to know that they took the information with them, so that they're going to either inevitably or they have shared that information. And so the non-compete always made protecting that information much, much easier. Now employers are going to have to show they know that the information is being shared, which is a difficult road to hoe. But these non-disclosure agreements are still lawful even if the non-compete ban goes into place. We expect litigation out of the Great Circuit Court of Appeals, the Fifth Circuit, which is just a wacky district that hates all employment law. So we expect to have some sort of injunction against this FTC rule, but that doesn't change the swing to getting rid of non-competes. We also have much easier ways to track information now. So we know whether or not people are actually stealing our stuff, and that helps too. But the non-compete always made it so easy, which was why it was so helpful.
Interesting. So Kate, earlier on, you alluded to, I think you said Oklahoma, Minnesota. There were a couple of others as well. Was California one of those?
Yes.
Okay.
North Dakota and California.
Okay. And yeah, I mean, especially California, very labor friendly, much more so than most other states, maybe any other state. Where we are, Minnesota, I think would lean that way, but not be as far. And then states like Oklahoma would be very much more on the pro corporate side. So right. Interesting. So even without the FTC rule, temporarily or perhaps permanently, if they lose, there are states where you cannot do these non-competes already.
Yes.
So that's probably a good way to look at what the impact would be. So for an employer like a Jimmy John's, a warehouse manufacturer, hotel chain, whatever, places where you're hiring dozens, hundreds, thousands a month, what's been the impact in those states? If you're an employer and it's like, oh my gosh, we've always had non-competes, am I going to have to pay much higher wages? Am I just going to have my trade secrets fly out the door? Do we stop hiring people? I mean, what do you think? Maybe your lawyer hat on, maybe your HR advisor hat on, maybe even more.
Sure.
What do you, for the employers, what do you say to them?
Well, what I say to them is, what are you so worried about this employee leaving? And what are you doing to try to keep them? Because if they have a bunch of information, or if they could go work for a competitor, then do your darndest to keep them working for you. Whether that is increased wages or better management training, or, better, upward trajectory, or whatever that particular employee needs. If they are happy, they don't leave. And so if they don't leave, then we don't have to worry about the non-compete or the non-disclosure. So I would put my efforts there of making sure that you are a good employer that people like to work for. But with the death of non-competes in these other 4 states, it's still normal. This isn't the end all be all, or the catastrophe that some organizations are making this out to be, because 4 states already have these prohibitions. Even Washington and Massachusetts, the salary threshold of $100,000 and below, you can't have a non-compete. Okay, that didn't end the hospitality industry in either of those states, right? That still exists. So it's not. I feel like a little Chicken Little is what's happening here.
It's funny that you said that, because that was exactly what I was thinking. It's maybe it's going to rain a little bit, but the sky's not falling. Right. So, get a little umbrella, or maybe get a little bit wet. It's okay, take a chance. One more question before we go, and that is for clarification. I've been hearing different things. I've been hearing that this applies across the board. No more non-competes for any kind of labor, any employee. And I've had other people say, no, it's below a threshold. So you can still have a non-compete for executives. I heard one person saying that, but maybe they were referring to some of the existing state laws.
I think they were referring to some of the existing state laws.
Okay.
I mean, even this rule will apply across the board, with the exception of sale of business. So if I,
Which
for
isn't
example,
employment.
which isn't employment, right?
Okay,
But
yeah.
this is designed to stop this practice so that every employee, even a CEO, can go, shop their wares elsewhere if they'd like.
Okay. Yeah, and I think, to me, on the employee side, to be clear, we don't have non-competes or like formal non-disclosures in our business. It's just something philosophically that I'm opposed to. So that's one of those things, as a founder, I get to win. And I've never had any pushback from any of our leaders about it. It's just not something we've ever done. But I can definitely see employers being very concerned about C-suite type people. And I guess that's where they're maybe going to have to, well, treat them better. But the reality is people leave. You can be the greatest employer in the world. You're still going to lose some people because there's not a good fit anymore. Maybe they want to move out of St. Cloud or, whatever it might be. I've been there. It's great. But okay. If you're looking for exciting nightlife, that's not where you go. But,
True.
So, well, cool. This is very enlightening. Any closing thoughts or things that you think, employers that should be looking out for, or what they should be concerned about?
I think really this is a time to really evaluate how well you protect your confidential information, your client list, your customer list, your trade secrets. Like, this is an opportunity to really button up those practices so that if there ever was a problem with someone who left, you'd be able to enforce it because you've done the work. So
interesting. Okay, yeah, get a little bit proactive. You might have half a year or something like that before this really comes into place. Well, Kate, awesome. The next time that we're out in Iceland together, or again, not at the same time, say hello to Ginger, our favorite whale.
Yes. Yes.
And thank you very much for joining. This has been great. Great seeing you again.
Thanks for having me.
Cheers.